Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is another ranking video. I'm actually a little bit surprised. I more or less accidentally had the end of June having 3 ranking videos of one form or another in here, and that's a little bit surprising. One of them being a series ranking that I did, I think, last Thursday or something like that, talking about Sun Eater and actually ranking that series. Today is more of a general ranking of sorts, and then next week I'm going to be updating my favorite books of all time, so I have a lot of ranking going on this month. That was, like I said, kind of unintentional and accidental. I didn't even realize that was what I was doing until I came to start making the thumbnails and recording these videos, and so a little bit too late for me to make any adjustments at this point, but that's okay. Today's video is titled Prepare to Cry for a reason, because we're going to talk about 5 books that absolutely devastated me, destroyed me emotionally, however it is that you want to call it. Technically, we're going to be talking about 7 books today, but we're going to say it's the top 5 plus a pair of honorable mention, and that's basically what we're going to be doing here. I think that this video is going to be an interesting one because I hadn't really actually thought about this topic very much until relatively recently, this year in fact, because 2 of these books that I'm going to be talking about in this video are books that I read for the first time in 2026. One of them I just read a couple months ago, and it's just I've read 2 books this year alone that have made me cry. Surely there are 5 books that I've read since I started the channel that have made me cry, and I can make a video about it because that would be a fun video to discuss. And so yeah, it's time to do it because I found 5 books that made me cry. I have some more books that I think might have, but I actually don't know for sure off the top of my head if they did. But these main 5 books I know for a fact did make me cry. So let's talk about a handful of books that may or may not also make you cry. But let's start off with a pair of honorable mentions. And there's 2 reasons why these are honorable mentions. Number 1 is because, it's not one of the main 5 books. And the other reason is because I can't actually remember if The Passenger and Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy did in fact make me cry. I do not recall. As I said in my sort of review that I did for these, and by the way, this box set of these, this hardcover set, if you can get these are pretty slick editions. I managed to get this for $5, quite literally $5. Some of the best $5 I've spent on books, to be honest. They're very nice. But no, I reviewed these couple of books in a slightly different way on the channel because they impacted me very strongly. Normally, I don't do scripted reviews on the channel for YouTube, but these 2 I had to write a long scripted review that was so long that, they don't fit on Goodreads. So they can't even be read in their full length on Goodreads. They have to be listened to. I guess I'll link to that video up there. It's an hour long, mind you, but during the portion of the review on Stella Maris, I do recall there being a sentence in there that said that I do not recall if either one of these books, particularly Stella Maris in the case of this discussion, actually made me cry. I think it might have. But the way that I was just so generally moved by this duology as a whole, I don't recall well enough to say if I did or not. I very well might not have cried. So that's part of the reason why these books aren't actually appearing on the list, is because while I think they did and they might have, I do not remember for a guarantee if they did for sure. And so it just did not justify including these on the list proper, but I did want to make a mention of them because they did definitely move me a lot. They definitely impacted me a lot, and that review that I just mentioned was one of my favorites, if not my favorite review that I've written for anything, just period. I just really liked writing that review. It meant a lot to me, and those books meant a lot to me. So, worth mentioning here, but again, I do not remember for sure if they actually made me cry. But moving into the proper list itself, I do know that all 5 of these books made me cry. For sure. This last book at number 5 on the rank. By the way, I should mention, these books aren't ranked in order of favorites. These are ranked in order of like general impact on me personally, right? That's probably the best way to put this. Les Mis is going to come in at number 5 for books that made me cry, because I do know that this one made me cry, but it was basically just tearing up at the very end of the journey, right? This was a book that was on my bucket list for forever, like basically since all the way back in like 4th grade. So come 2022, when I'm doing this booktube channel thing, it's just like, you know what, I'm finally ready to actually tackle that book. It's really long, but let's go ahead and do it. I planned to read it in November and December of 2022, and managed to read this book starting on the very first day of the month in November and finished at the very last day of the month of November. Just spent that entire month reading this one book, and one of my favorite reading experiences ever. It's one of my favorite books ever. It's kind of, spoiler for next week's video talking about my favorite books of all time. This will make an appearance on there, but that's no surprise to people who have been on this channel for a number of years. But in either case, Les Mis was a journey that was like, just the culmination of all 1,300 pages of it, right? Like, there's technically this last, chapter that's like this last half page here, but not counting this last half page, it was like this last paragraph, this last couple of paragraphs here of the book, that following that 1,300 page journey just really punched me and were like, you just finished this thing, you just accomplished this book, and it was really good. You loved it, every single second of it, even the tangents I don't hate, right? Like, it's just a very memorable experience. It was a cry that was experienced more from being moved rather than by being sad or emotional, and more so like the end of a journey. It was one of those things where I believe my brief review that I wrote of this on Goodreads said something along the lines of that. Not technically the final line, because again, it was ahead of this last half-page chapter, but that closing line, so to speak, was one that really hit for me, and one that hit for me largely because of the 1,300 pages that came before it. Without the context of that journey, the line doesn't really, hit necessarily as hard, but it was one that made me, move to tears, because it was like I said, kind of a huge accomplishment. It was a very big book for me as far as that is concerned, crossing off the bucket list item, but also just the fact that I loved the book so much, it made a big difference to me. So Les Mis is one book that made me cry for that reason. Number 4 on this list is going to be going in a completely other direction than the literary side of things, and that'll be Return to Adan by Philip Chase, so an epic fantasy book. I don't want to go on record saying that this is the only fantasy book that I've read to yield tears from me, because that's not necessarily... It might not be true, but I think it might be the one that has made me cry. I've been moved, to tearing up by some other fantasy books that I can think of off the top of my head, but this is the one that I think is worth mentioning for this list, which might be a little bit crazy to say. And I don't just say this out of bias, because I know Philip, and I got this book for free, for example. He sent this to me personally before the book was actually officially out, so thank you, Philip, for that. But even so, I just found that the thematic quality of everything within the book, and the way that this wraps up the entire series, the way that the sacrifice just meant so much more by the end of this journey, by the end of this trilogy, that the end of this book just managed to move me to tears, because I felt like it was actually handling a lot of that stuff really, really, really well, just spiritually speaking. I think that it does a lot of things intrinsically true and correct, and depicts a lot of that within the idea of humanity in ways that were very, again, moving. The sacrifice of it all was one that I really resonated with, and it did make me cry. So, Return to Adan is also one of my favorite books of all time. I think that almost all of these books on this list are on my favorite books of all time list next week. So I guess come back next week to hear me talk a little bit more about most of these books. But Return to Adan was one that I just really, really enjoyed. I may need to reread the book or rewatch my reviews, because I don't remember for sure if this is, again, the only fantasy book to straight up move me to tears, but this is the one worth noting for sure, even if it isn't. So, yeah, there was a hell of a lot more meaning in Return to Adan than I expected to find in there, and it it just worked for me. But sticking along the genre wavelength for a little bit longer here, moving on to item number 3 of this list, Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Ruocchio is probably no, no surprise to find on this list here. If you've read the series, it's probably no surprise that either this book or Ashes of Man would end up on the list. Pretty much obligatory picks for any big fan of the series, at least in my opinion. When I think of the topic, what books have made me cry, this is the first book that I think of easily, handily, hands down. Like, when I was coming up with the idea earlier this year of like, should I do a video about like which books have made me cry? This was like the one, well, I know Kingdoms of Death has. What other books have made me cry? And I like have to think about it for a little bit longer, but this is the one that I know guaranteed made me cry, not just because it made me cry once, but because it made me cry twice, and because it made me cry twice in the space of only 3 chapters. Like, that is in many ways makes Kingdoms of Death the book to make me cry. It was certainly the first book to make me cry since I started the channel, since I started, reading again, basically. Or, well, I guess Les Mis is included here, and I technically read that before Kingdoms of Death, but like, as far as the sheer amount of tears, this book is definitely unique in that regard. And by the way, Ashes of Man didn't make me cry. That one made me catatonic. Kingdoms of Death made me cry. So this is the one that is ending up in appearance there. If you know, the sequence of chapters that caused that to happen. So yeah, Kingdoms of Death, number 3, seems pretty fitting. Number 2 on this list is where we come up to the 2 books this year in 2026 that have made me cry so far. And this one was the one that I read back in January. Actually, come to think. No, that's wrong. Okay, never mind. I was thinking that I had ordered these in a different way. Anyway, number 2 is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. This one, this was the book that probably hit an important time for me early in the year, probably the most importantly timed book for me, like on a personal level. The next book is the most, you could say maybe unfortunately timed in some sense, but The Three Musketeers is the one that like I really needed at a time when I really needed it. That sentence was redundant, but I've been struggling with some resurgence of mental health issues as of recently, as of this year predominantly. And that's been something that's been a struggle for me because I basically, overcome a lot of that stuff after I graduated high school. So I would say from 2021 up through, basically right up until the very end of 2025, I was doing, quite well, very stable. Hadn't had any of the issues that plagued me during high school, for example. But early this year, definitely saw some of my issues that I was struggling with in high school pop back up, recur again a little bit. My review of this book talks a little bit more about that. It is definitely a situation where this is kind of similar to Les Mis in that it is technically not the final line of the book, because there is technically, what do you want to call it, this sort of epilogue chapter that's like a page here, but the very last closing lines of the very last chapter, which is called Conclusion, those very last closing lines of the book are now my favorite closing line of all time, where previously I would have given that to Les Mis with the little asterisk next to it. Now I give that to Three Musketeers with the little asterisk next to it, because this one sticks in my head a little bit more and is a little bit more relevant to me, right? It is one where it's not technically spoilers. It kind of implies a little bit of something, right? But overall, it is basically just the character of Athos speaking to the main character, D'Artagnan, speaking from a place of heart and truth, right? He basically says, like, you are young yet, and you still have time for your bitter memories to turn to sweet ones. And reading that line, reading that closing chapter of this book at the time that I did, was one that I really, really needed at the time that I read it. Though I've still been struggling in the months since I read the book back in January, this is one that, reminds me not to wallow in self-pity, one that I should probably, remind myself of, a sort of like lesson that I should remind myself of a little bit more often, because I am prone towards that kind of, wallowing aspect, I suppose. And so Three Musketeers is like one that really moved me, because it was basically telling me not to do that, essentially. So that is why Three Musketeers is number 2 on this list, but that is one that definitely made me cry. Probably the happiest tears, I suppose. Maybe not the happiest, but more like the most seen tears. But the tears that were probably the most I don't want to say bitter per se, because I don't know that that's necessarily the right way to put it, but where the Three Musketeers tried to remedy my struggle, right? The Sparrow kind of fed my struggle. So number one on this list is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. It's a little bit simplistic to say it that way, but I suppose, how am I going to summarize this? I would say that this book hit hard because of impossibly nuanced spiritual theme. I tried to do a review of this book, and that was something that I should probably mention about Three Musketeers. My review of Three Musketeers is maybe still my longest review that I've posted, and that was one that was hard to get through because of, you know, the way that it made me cry and explaining the reason why at the very end of it. So if you're curious about that, you can watch that review. I would say maybe don't watch my review of The Sparrow, however, because I did a not fantastic job talking about it in the sense of like why I think it is so good. Basically, the reason why I think it's so good is because of how nuanced it is with the spiritual and religious topics that it covers. I don't think that there's any other book that could possibly talk about some of those ideas as well as The Sparrow does. I do not think it's possible. And the way that all of those themes are so important to what makes this book what it is, if you know the reason why the Sparrow is called the Sparrow, it just kind of really hits, right? Like, I was moved and pretty emotional throughout my entire read of the book. I was devastated through the entire read because it's one of those things where it's like shit's gonna hit the fan. You know it's gonna hit the fan at some point, and you're just kind of waiting for that to happen, and it takes the entire book to build up to that moment. It's very much a slow burn in that way. But that moment at the very end of the book, when kind of the revelation of everything, like when that shit hitting the fan is finally revealed, like what actually happened. And then again, like I said, the Sparrow being called the Sparrow is kind of revealed basically in the last chapter. All of that just really culminated in something that absolutely broke me for, you know, kind of the reasons why the Three Musketeers, like I said, for positive vibes, I should put Three Musketeers above this, because it's trying to remind me not to wallow in self-pity, but the Sparrow basically puts words to that sorrow that I've felt all of this year. You know, those struggles have been basically defined by this book in some way. Not defined by the book, but were like explained by the book. You know, I was able to read myself into a lot of that in ways that, you know, kind of suck. It's part of why it made me cry. But the way that the Sparrow happened to hit me is one that will stick with me permanently, you know, not just like a forever, I mean like permanently and fundamentally. There's a core of my being that is like fundamentally shifted because of the way that this book helped me to like kind of see and explore some of those ideas and those topics. No matter how I spiritually develop from this point forward, how much I mature in that way, even if I, you know, develop into kind of opposite of what this book, you know, kind of ends on, like as far as like the tone of it, right? I will still very much always look back on this book and kind of the way that it explained the way that I felt in some sense, and just be moved by that. Like I don't know how else to explain it. It's probably still kind of like my review of the book, probably a pretty poor explanation. But yeah, The Sparrow is definitely the book that will probably permanently be part of my life forever, just because of how much that impacted me, and the reasons why it made me cry were related to the title, you know. And so yeah, that is the video, I guess. Now that we're done with this topic, I think I should probably think about some laugh out loud quality books, to be honest. What books have made me laugh? Should I make that into a video at some point? I don't know. But now that I'm done with this video here, I'm kind of sick of feeling depressed, because that's most of what I felt for most of this year, so I should probably think of happier stuff at the moment. But I did want to make this video because I did have a couple books that made me cry this year. Felt like I had enough books to talk about to make a list like this. Here we are. That was the video. Hope you enjoyed it. But that is the end of the video. What books have made you cry? I would be curious to hear about them, if some of them are the same, or some of them maybe I've never heard of. I don't know. Just let me know in the comments below. I would be curious to hear about it. But for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.